Hello, everybody, and welcome to Signal, a weekly show where Andrea, myself, and some of the members here at Nova, we curate the latest news for you on tech, AI, and the future of work. And this week, we are excited to do so with Matthias, who is our recently appointed winner of the Nova 111 student list in the UK. This is actually the first time we issued a list in the UK, and the level of quality of the applicants was really outstanding. Of course, the UK has some of the best universities in the world, actually. And yeah, Matthias, congratulations and welcome to Signal.
Thank you very much, Ramon, and thank you, Andrea. Obviously, super happy to be here, and also for this recognition to be on this list. As I think Ramon said, there's a lot of highly talented and driven people on this list. So just being on this list is amazing, but also being recognized as the Supernova is also like just bonus and positive. So thank you very much, for taking all the time to creating this list and for also the community that you're building.
Totally. We do it passionately because we believe talent in Europe in general needs to be more recognized and more empowered to do great things. I don't think we need to envy the talent in the US or in Asia. We have the same or more talent born in Europe, but we sometimes need more ambition and more higher heights to look upon. So it's great to recognize people like you that at a very young age are doing amazing things. So why don't you super briefly tell us about your experience so far and what got you into the list?
Yep, sure. So my name is Matthias. I mostly grew up in Europe, and then I did my high school IB diploma in the UK. And following that, I joined Imperial College in London to study mechanical engineering. And that's where I started being interested in interfacing machines and humans, so with the case of prosthetics. And in order to develop the robotics expertise and knowledge deeper, I joined ETH Zurich for my final year, where I worked on exoskeletons, which are devices that help humans move. And then I looked at the other side of things, working more on trying to understand humans. So that project was focusing on using the meta glasses to decode human emotions. And I now recently joined Harvard to start my PhD, where I sort of merged these two aspects, where it's still focusing on the exoskeletons on one hand for helping people with Parkinson's to walk, but also focusing on the machine learning side of things and trying to create models, so foundation models that are like best understand the way people walk. So such that if I give a device to someone that's 20-year-old and healthy, or if I give it to someone that has Parkinson's and is 70 years old, the device will just be able to learn how the person walks and to adapt seamlessly.
Super cool. And you are on probably some of the latest that is now moving in AI, right? Because now that, let's say, LLMs and digital work, it's clear that it's either automated or soon to be automated. The next big challenge, I guess, is robotics and the physical world. As I always say, the world of atoms is very tough. So it's exciting to be building there. Tell us a bit more about this dichotomy, if you want, as a first question, in between. I'm seeing a lot of companies building humanoids out there. The Tesla, what was the name? The Optimus, right? And there's a bunch of those. So the promise is in 10, 20 years, you get one of these working at home for you, versus the, let's say, wearables that enhance human conditions, right? Like, what's the trade-off there, and what are your, where do you see the trend going?
I'd say I'm obviously biased in my response because I work on exoskeletons, but I think, so we can maybe deconstruct exoskeletons first, what they do. So originally it was, used to enhance human capabilities by providing forces at the joints to help them walk. And initial funding was usually from the military. But now, obviously, I think there's been a clear benefit in showing that for clinical populations, it's extremely useful. And when you look at Europe, for example, that has an aging population where 1 in 3 people is going to be over 65 years old by 2050. I think, having wearables that can assist elderly is going to be like massive in terms of alleviating the burden on healthcare, but also empowering people in their day-to-day life such that, they're able to do more things. Now, putting this in comparison to humanoids obviously have this sci-fi aspect, right? From all these Terminator movies. And that's maybe the less positive aspect, but, it's
Star Wars, no?
Star Wars. Let's Star Wars. But it's like super cool, and I think this idea of replicating humans is also pulls a lot of hype to it. I think there's a discussion on whether humanoids are the best robots you want to build to serve specific tasks. And I think the idea is with a humanoid, you basically have this general purpose robot that can do a lot of different tasks. And that's why there's a lot of investments going there. But I know there are some people which will tell you, why not just build a very easy robot with wheels that's good at doing this very one thing, if it's laundry, for example. So I guess it's two sides of a coin. I think just in terms of in general, robotics is going to boom, and I hope help improve the lives of humans.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something around training through data sets of humans, meaning observing how humans act in the real life. I think even Meta was on the news last week for just absorbing data and observation for employees outsourced somewhere in a country for later removing that human component. So I think there is also debate that is opening up around the privacy and the data ownership, right? Because if you're observing a human, then the data sits a bit on an ownership that is unclear. So my question is, have you seen any trend there in terms of people realizing the importance of the data, or how is the space moving?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing to say is data is everything. If you have bad data, you can have the best model in the world. Your output will still be pretty crappy. I think there's different companies trying different things out. So some of them will collect all their data on themselves, in their workshop. Others, like 1X, are sending their robots to people's homes and collecting the data there. So that's something you have to agree to as a person. I personally wouldn't want a robot recording all my data, but I guess it is a necessary step, if you want to bring these robots to the home. I think a way to improve the privacy in terms of robotics and wearables is having all the systems run locally. So, the data isn't saved and it just fed through the model. But even with LLMs and, if you use ChatGPT, for example, they still record your data and, delete it after 30 days, but you don't know if they actually use it. It's been used in court cases as well. So there is a need for data for sure, but there's also, I think, privacy questions which have to be addressed in terms of when can these robots record data, maybe having, a lamp, flash or something to indicate to the user that data is being collected, because I think, there's been a few scandals otherwise when, you collect data when people aren't aware of it or also against it.
Yeah, even the Meta glass, the Ray-Ban Meta, I've seen a lot of privacy concerns just to keep it small, but I guess at health data and that level of privacy, it's a very delicate borderline.
And you put forward also an important topic that I believe it's relevant, Matthias, in this discussion, is that it seems like the more, let's say, fun or more, the robots with the best narrative, which might be those humanoids, are getting all of the attention. But then the reality of life is that probably those very concrete robots for specific purposes have actually a bigger market, or at least a shorter time to market for them to be real, right? Because I'm unsure whether my mom would like a humanoid, robot at her home. I doubt it, really. But I'm pretty sure, in a lot of manufacturing companies, and a lot of, there's a lot of jobs that are not meant for humans. So it's clearly not the most desirable or enjoyable thing that a human may do. For instance, there's this company out of Barcelona that I love called Thecker. They've been raising a lot of money. They did the biggest pre-seed in the history of Spain, something like 20 million or so. And these guys were building robots for basically manufacturing and other types of work. And they were hyper specialized. So, for instance, one of the robots was apparently kind of putting clothes in the right, putting them properly, let's say, for clothing stores. So I'm with you that probably, although the Optimus is getting all of the attention, those exoskeletons that you mentioned, or those highly purposed robots, would be the ones that actually will reshape the world in the coming years. And here, more of a futuristic question for you that is a little bit more in the space than we are. Like, we are all the time discussing how AI might reshape or put out of work labor, kind of white collar labor, but the amount of blue collar labor that might be reshaped by robotics is even larger. What's your take on the future of work, and are you more of an optimist, a pessimist? Like, what's your take?
I'd say, yeah, I'm more of a realist, like in terms of, the information that I get, that I read or that I discuss with friends. I think it's important to decouple the discussion in terms of blue collar jobs, white collar jobs, because I think these are very different things. I think there's a lot of blue collar jobs where demand is lacking, as in people don't want to do these heavy duty jobs anymore. So I think there's like a true real gap to fill in these types of jobs. If you look more at like the white collar jobs, so this is more to do with AI. I think if you are to model a company as like maybe a pyramid, right? Or which has, so you have a triangle, and then you have 3 levels where you have, the leadership at the top, the middle management, where like the project managers or team leads, and then the bottom level is like the people, researchers, consultants, juniors. I think what we're seeing is this diamond is this triangle is becoming a diamond, where before you had a team of 10 people maybe to do a certain task, and now you only need 5 people with AI to do that task. And so because you have less people like doing the grunt work, it means you need less managers to manage them and lead them. And so you have like, this inverted sort of triangle. And I think in the case of people specifically, it means either you lose your job, unfortunately, due to the AI, or you're the person working with the AI, but then you have to be even more productive than you were before, because, and this is a pattern I've been seeing a lot, also discussing with, colleagues, where, because AI allows you to do so many things now so quickly, you never have time to stop. There's always like next. And so, I guess you want to try being one of those people that is working with AI as best as possible, and not being one of the ones left out.
Mm-hmm. No, it's very, very much. I don't know if you have a follow-up question on this one, because I had another topic.
No, I was going to say that, of course, I think that's the word that we know about white collar, but I'm more preoccupied about blue collar, right? Because although all the attention is now going to those white collar jobs that are in risk, the moment those heavy duty jobs get automated, in the past, when all of those revolutions used to happen, people moved to more white collar jobs, right?
Yeah.
The reality is that if today, at the same time, we're putting a lot of pressure on those white collar jobs that you need to be hyper productive, the transition of population from blue collar to hyper skilled white collar is something that it's hard to think of in my mind. So the moment robotics really kicks off and truly starts automating heavy duty jobs on the blue collar side, probably the impact on the job market as a whole probably even larger than what's happening today is already on the white collar, right? So I think as a society we need to be prepared for a massive shock the moment robotics truly gets unlocked as a new technology that clearly cannot, because the reality is that if possible, that's a job that is priced on the cost, right? If a robot is less costly than a human being, there's no question people would hire the robot. Whereas on the white collar, you can always think that the white collar enhanced with AI may do more. Like, I see it a bit, the business case is a bit tougher. In my mind, in the blue collar, people are going to be very analytical and precise on what's the lowest cost to do stuff.
Yeah, I think one way to maybe think of it is for white collar jobs, at least given the current AI advancements, it's more of a reduction in people, where for blue collar, you could see it as a replacement in a lot of cases.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah,
I think these are important discussions that governments have to have.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think if the demand shifts, then there is a large part of the population. I think about 40% of the world is in blue collar. I think they will need to be reskilled. And it might be an elevation of human conditions because bringing 50 kilos of stuff around or working high intensity in a fulfillment center, we can argue maybe is not even human in the way companies want it to be. So perhaps there is an overall elevation of human quality, but then where these people get allocated, if at all, it's, as you say, I think a societal question because there is no way around it. My question, Matthias, was more related on to the comparison between the European Union and the US, because at the end, you have been around some of the best schools in Europe, like ETH in Switzerland, which is maybe one of the world's best in engineering, but you ended up on the other side of the ocean anyway. So I wanted to ask you, what has been the driver of that journey? And also what have been your observation in terms of differences on how US and Europe have allowed you to flourish and grow?
Yeah, maybe can decouple this question into why my decisions and then maybe my view on the US vs EU. I think, so for me personally, I did my high school in the UK and I really wanted to stay in the UK because I think in terms of undergraduate experience and also learning, it's just amazing, and being in London was a lot of fun. So I see Imperial as like this time where, you had options to think about what you're interested in doing. And then I moved to ETH, because it's like, I think top 3 in the world, arguably in robotics, at least. It's like a true powerhouse. And I really wanted to start doing hard research. And I think that's where, it was hard, but I think the outcome was good. And for me, then coming to Harvard or the US, was then taking this technicality and trying to scale it up. So obviously, as a PhD student here, the projects that are funded can have like a way bigger impact. For example, we're running like clinical studies, right, which would be very expensive to run. And so having the ability, to have access to all these resources, I think is, at least for me, one of the key motivators as to why I came here. And also the fact that you have this entire ecosystem at Cambridge with MIT, but also in the US in general, because I think you really feel the sense of opportunity. Like everyone has a startup in mind, everyone is trying to get to or join a new startup. So it's very, very active. And then like comparing to the EU, and this is just talking from my friends, but a lot of people when they come, so the EU is like super talented, right? There's like amazing schools that aren't nearly as expensive as in the US, and a lot of talented engineers and people working in computer science and like all over the board. But I think one of the sort of problems with the EU is when these people graduate, they look at the job market and they see, I can be working in an engineering role where and this is like a pretty financial outlook, but I'll be paid maybe, I don't know, in the UK, I think it was 30 or 40,000 pounds as you come out. And then they have all these finance and consulting jobs, which pay almost double. And for a lot of people, this is a very simple decision. And then you see your friends joining these industries. And so it's a lot of like talent, which is then sifted and moved to consulting and finance. And these people usually then stay in these careers and don't, return to their original field. And I have a lot of friends who tell me they love the engineering, right? But just because of financial reason, it's like the wrong objectives which are being optimized in a sense. So I think, in Switzerland and in the US, for example, the engineering, being an engineer, you get compensated very well. So I think a lot of people who can move to these places try to do so.
Oh, it's a very good way to put it. And to summarize, is both amount of resources during your research studies and the job market that pays the premium you deserve because your competences are highly demanded. I guess it's also because the companies themselves have reached the level of market maturity and address such a big market that they can even harvest more from their technology and IPs and build huge companies. If you look at the latest in robotics, they're pretty much Chinese and US as well as space exploration. So
the reality is that the expenditure on capex and research of American companies is at the several GDP percentage points ahead of Europe, right? And that explains what Matthias just mentioned about salaries for R&D and engineering. The supply is probably as big or bigger because the schools are cheaper, and probably on average my experience, at least at Columbia, is that the grad level in Europe is higher. Like you get the demand is it's more demanding. You get an average classmate that is more talented, but the reality is that when you go master's PhD level, that flips around, and the best students of Europe do what Matthias just did, is go after a better ecosystem, and that's a pity. And that we as Europe would need to rethink this, right? Because if our best talent, like Matthias, is then having his best years of career and his best research done in the US, he'll end up doing hopefully a great startup, but it's going to be based in the US and therefore creating jobs and wealth in the US, right? And I think that's what needs to change in Europe.
I agree.
Cool. Shall we move on to discussing a few of the news of the week? So basically here, Matthias just jumping with whatever you read that you believe is worth your attention. But maybe we can start with Google, which is one of the typical players we discuss. And there was this, I'm always predicting that Google will end up winning this race. And apparently the Pentagon is already expanding the use of Gemini after, dropping Anthropic for contract eligibility. They have an agreement with OpenAI, but apparently they start to use a lot of Gemini for classified work. And, again, this vertical integration of Google and this massive amount of data they have positions them as a, clear, or in my view, probably one of the long-term winners. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. That very quickly, Gemini took over the Anthropic contract.
Yeah, I think, or Andrea, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was saying that I think there is an institutional trust in those big tech, like Apple, also opening conversation with OpenAI for their Siri model, but then going on a Gemini. I think there is an innate trust in the institutional players, but yeah, happy to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think you also mentioned this in last week's podcast where Microsoft sort of updated its agreement with OpenAI, So I think, yeah, Google was behind at the beginning, but they have such like a powerhouse in DeepMind. Like DeepMind is basically the place where everyone wants to work at the moment, right? Because they do this AI for good, but also work on the LLMs. And I think the work Demis has been leading is at a standard which is so high that where he was originally just used to, his role was just leading the research. I think he's now also leading, having way more responsibilities at Google, which is, I think, why, they're doing better and getting all these other contracts. And I think, yeah, for the more specialized companies like Anthropic or OpenAI, I guess for them, it's going to be a question of trying to find these other big players and to sort of partner with to try and, still have access to the hardware, the data, and also the engineers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, mentioning DeepMind, I think one of the news that came up was that they raised this $1.1 billion funding for going in what they call ineffable intelligence, so sort of self-learning without humans in the loop. That's something that we discussed already a couple of weeks ago from a Chinese model that managed to have a model that corrects itself in iterations. And I didn't know DeepMind was as demanded from talent as you described it, Matthias. I thought Anthropic was the hottest to work for.
But the cool thing about this fundraising you mentioned, Andrea, that was one of the star researchers at DeepMind. His name is David Silver, I believe. He was the guy behind AlphaGo. So that guy left DeepMind to create this new company, and his first round of investment is at 1.1 billion. So that means that probably the company is worth something like maybe 5 billion or something. And yeah, it's exactly what you said. Like without, let's say, human inputs, the idea is that this AI is kind of self-directing its own advancement. So yeah, as we have discussed also in previous chapters, we have all this feeling that we are now at this point of singularity where the models start to train the models, and 2027 is going to be probably very different to what we're seeing today.
I think one thing, changing the topic, but speaking on this one a little bit, is I've read this court ruling in China that was quite interesting, because for the first time, at least officially, we see a government stepping into the fact that you cannot fire an employee because of LLM reasoning, meaning you cannot justify the layoff with AI doing a better job. So we start to see government taking a stance when it comes to the impact on the job market. And I know China is very advanced on many of the AI models, but seeing that, I mean, not surprised that it's China to do this first step, but it signals, as we were discussing before, that governments cannot sit still and wait for the inevitable to happen. So it's interesting to see whether this trend will keep going into Europe. US is a bit more difficult.
But seems inevitable, right? Like, are you because it's very hard to say, okay, this is an LLM layoff or it's just saving costs, like Block did, the founder of Twitter, actually, Jack Dorsey. So the reality is that the moment a company does layoffs, it's very hard to, counter argue, okay, you cannot do it because it's an LLM, but you can do it because it's just an efficiency of a synergy, right? So I was also, I also read that one. Not sure how long governments will be able to play that model. I think they should be more concentrated on providing, UBI and other kind of solutions for those that are affected by layoffs, and that particularly when we discuss about blue collars cannot retrain or reskill to find a new job.
No, I agree.
What else? I think that I read again on OpenAI that was interesting is that now that they are being exposed on the court battle that they're having with Elon, they rewrote their foundational text, basically kind of their how you call this, their they call it founding charter or something like this. So basically in that charter, what they used to say is that if there's a safer organization than us to prevent AI from, being a danger towards humanity, we will let them go ahead. But now they won't let them. So they took away that part, which, is again in the line that we have been seeing, that they don't smell any longer as an NGO, and actually they no longer even smell as the company that will have your rights and your privacy and your, the future of humanity at their best heart. I think Anthropic has won that race through other means, not necessarily not being for profit. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. And again, Elon has yet a new argument to defend his position.
Yeah, I think it's hard to comment exactly on the case because I don't think we have the full information or picture. But I think there's this immense pressure on OpenAI, right, to deliver, especially because they want to IPO soon. And I think it was their chief financial officer who was giving warnings, saying, they're not going to meet the
targets. Yeah,
and I think she now has to report to someone else, like in the company. So
she got demoted, no?
Basically, yeah. So I think, I wouldn't want to be in the shoes of Sam Altman right now, because I think he has a lot of very difficult decisions to be making.
Indeed.
Yeah, because on the one side, he should be focusing on the product and winning the battle against Gemini and Anthropic, but then he's in court, and then he's on all of these legal procedures. So, not the easiest.
That's precisely Elon's mission to distract them, while with XAI, he keeps on catching up. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see how fast the ruling will take place. I think one other news comes again from I think a public stance from, for the ones loving cinematography, the Oscars deciding to ban AI actors and AI written scripts from eligibility. I think this also shows a little bit of a collective group that take an official stand against AI, because I think you've seen the model of Seedance 2 and everything that now you can do with creative video production. It's insane. But yeah, I think it's interesting to see that there are associations who are starting to take a clear stand. Though I think, as we discussed with the earlier case of China, I think it's inevitable. And at the end, if you can enhance a video emotionally or even the live effect, I think it's desirable that you take that step. Maybe I'm a bit more doubtful around the cloning of actors and actually paying just their IP without having them to play on screen, because that has been already happening with me as Leonardo DiCaprio earning the money of my IP image, but I don't need to go to work. So they become more scalable if you want, but there is a thin line that is fun to see.
The power law, right? Like the very best will get cloned and then get more money, and then all of the others. Probably the future of a lot of actors, similar to sports, goes back to live performance, right? Because the reality is that the same time, actors on movies, a lot of them will have a hard time. I think sport athletes are at their prime, and they'll keep being so, because the reality is that you don't want to watch. I don't want to watch Tesla Optimus playing soccer. Like, that's not fun. I want to watch humans, right? And everything we have seen since the latest 20th century, where we don't even let humans take drugs or enhance themselves artificially. Probably we see a comeback of theater, right? Because you probably want to watch the best actors in theater live, right? Not in movies.
Yeah. Back to the roots. Yeah.
I think it's also the case at chess, right? So you have Stockfish and all these other models which are way better than humans, but no one's interested in watching them. So
you want to watch the Norwegian guy? What's his name?
Magnus Carlsen.
Carlsen, yeah, exactly. Maybe one last on Sam Altman before we move to other stuff. There was this Stripe sessions, kind of a yearly conference by Stripe, where Sam Altman was invited, and he pitched a future of OpenAI that I kind of agree with. Like, if we project ourselves in 10, 20 years, where intelligence is abundant, probably energy is also cheap and abundant to finance that intelligence. They saw themselves as a Stripe of intelligence, in which they were, a low margin player that was enabling the rest of, the economy to do its stuff. And they were kind of keen to replicate a bit of the Stripe, where they are everywhere. They charge, very thin margins, so you don't really care. Like, if you're launching your, a new business, you're never going to replace Stripe. You just use Stripe because it's just a 1% of you, and you don't really care. And I kind of believe this is the future of foundational model companies. If we see the trend where we're seeing where there's enough competition, these hypotheses that they might just raise prices and suddenly be super profitable, I don't think that's going to happen. I think there's probably enough competition, enough pressure from buyers, and enough pressure from open source models for them to end up having to be kind of a low margin infrastructure player, where actually most of their advantage is not even in the models, probably in the future, but actually having energy and land and enough computing capacity to serve us all, because the demand is simply skyrocketing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good point. And also why I think what you're doing in hardware, as well as the Apple strategy that we commented on last week, the fact that they distribute the hardware as a distribution on-device intelligence, I think is more hardware than software, the defensibility of the margins. So it's exciting to.
Yeah, I think this idea of having a Stripe-like model is good, because it's like a, recurrent revenue, but obviously they have these expectations they have to meet. And I think all AI companies right now are losing a lot of money for the very cheap subscriptions that we have. So what they're hoping for is that users become dependent, on Cloud Code or Nano Banana, and that when they increase the prices, we follow in order to pay for, all these very expensive training and infrastructure.
I would challenge a bit that view, Matthias, and go more for the reality is that we although we believe, everybody around us uses a lot of cloud code, we are in a bit of a bubble. The reality, like people like you or even us, like we are early adopters. The other day I was checking, like something like 86% of humanity has never used AI. And, out of the remaining 14%, only like, I don't know, 12% or something was, only 2% was paying, and then the 12% was free, right? So the reality is that I think the hope for Sam and Elon and all of these companies is, I don't think they would be able to increase prices so much more, maybe a little bit, but rather having many more people use them. I think that's the path towards profitability, because the reality is at the moment, open source models become good enough. You can run them locally, and then there's they always have to play with that dichotomy. And the reality is that we saw this last week, I believe, with the DeepSeek and others, other Chinese models. They are not that far from the frontier models these days.
No, and I think lots of the cost efficiency will be on energy, on cheap production, on increasing the margin, let's say at the top of the process, and reducing maybe the model size to make it way more efficient per token. But it's true that I wanted to add to your point, Matthias, that while they're cheap today, I think we're also paying them indirectly with our data without realizing. So we are paying a small fee, but they're training their models. So we are part of the whole economic transaction is much bigger than the price. We'll see if they increase it once the model are well trained, but we are financing them also with our data indirectly.
Actually, what they always said about Facebook, and the like, is that if you don't pay for something, you are the product. I think what they claim is that they do train on free users, right? I'm not exactly sure, you mentioned that before, Matthias, but I believe that if you're on enterprise packages, at least they claim not to train with your data. Then if they do, probably you cannot know. But the free users, they do tell you that they will train models with your data, right?
Yeah, you have to read the fine print.
Exactly. Great.
What else? Maybe a couple of last pieces of news. There was the Y Combinator request for startups. So Matthias, now you are getting closer maybe to, I don't know, if you have a startup and entrepreneurship maybe in your future. But they did this request for startups that was cool, where they basically giving out ideas to people for them to apply to the next batch. And if anybody that listens to us is kind of eager to create a startup, this is a good way to look for trends. And then there were a couple that were interesting. There's a lot of services, and we have been seeing a lot of that. One I found interesting is that they were looking for startups to replace Workday, which is one of those softwares you believe they were more defensible and not subject to agent replacement. But apparently, they believe that now is the time to replace Workday, which is one of those behemoths that we see it in our cases when we sell Nova Recruiter and the client has Workday. You say, okay, it's never ever they will change for that. Well, now Y Combinator believes there was someone will be able to come and replace it. It's a $10 billion company. It's not that. I mean, it's very big, but it's not that big. But they are probably coping most of the Fortune 500 companies with their HR system. So yeah, let's see if someone is able to do that. I think that would be a beautiful company to build, because the product is really bad. Like, I've never met a client that was satisfied with Workday.
Maybe we should do it, expand from outbound to all the rest.
To doing everything else.
Let's see. I think from our end, in terms of news, I think it was fun because you mentioned Stripe, that they released a wallet for agents. So now agents can spend my money through the Stripe wallet. That was fun because I think it's going into that direction. So you can give a wallet through the link, which is a payment platform under Stripe, and they can spend on your behalf. Of course, the transaction needs to be approved for now, but it's moving into the direction of autonomous spending, and everything around selling to agents become a real thing, because I've read a lot about optimizing your website for agents to make final decisions. So I think it's surfacing an economy of agents evaluating and spending on your behalf, which is going to be an interesting battle.
Yeah, I think there's like a large statistic nowadays where most users on the internet is actually AI. Like I don't remember this. Was it maybe 47%? But like a crazy amount, and I was shocked at knowing that
Wow.
half of the internet is basically just AI agents scraping it.
Wow.
So how the traffic of the visits are agents already, and bots? Yeah, that's huge. That's probably just going to grow tenfold over the next month. So cool, Matthias. I think that was a good session. Anything that you take with you? Any reflections before we close?
Yeah, well, first of all, again, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to discuss these topics with you. I think the field of AI is moving super quickly, and it's very hard to keep up. And so I think having, friends or peers with which to have these discussions is important, so that you don't have to learn everything by yourself and you can have other people inform you. And I'd say there is reason to worry for AI, but there's also a reason for being optimistic. And I'd say, we are humans. We've gone through evolution to get to this point. So let's also take a step back sometimes, let the hype flow, and then think things through and think on how we can make the most out of this.
No, super cool. I fully agree with that. Also, one thing I take with me, not only this more optimist, humanist view, is that we at Europe have fantastic talent like yourself, but there's also a challenge that we, as a European society, need to take on providing with better opportunities. And that probably passes through more ambitious people, like are daring to build fantastic companies based out of Europe and hire great researchers and dare to compete with the Americans and the Chinese. So also maybe a request for entrepreneurs and bold Europeans to build big projects here.
Awesome. No, for me, I think it's a reminder to not leave robotics out of the hype, because I think most of our time is spent on the hype of Anthropic versus OpenAI, while there is in the labs of the world incredible machinery is being built, and the impact on the economy in terms of GDP of those advancements will be massive. And also I think what you mentioned on human life quality, imagine the elders and all of that, just thinking of smart exoskeletons is something I didn't really spend time on for the last few months. So having the robotics perspective in mind, I think it's something very exciting as well. So thanks, Matthias, for joining us and for bringing your amazing journey and perspective to the show. And see you next time for the ones following.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Matthias.
Thank you. Bye.